Today I'm talking to my friend Harvey Kwiyani, who originally comes from Malawi, but these days he's a lecturer in African Christianity at Liverpool Hope University. He's also the author of 2 books which have had a very significant impact on me and on my thinking. I will link to them in the video notes. They are Sent Forth, and a book that I want to talk about today, Multicultural Kingdom. But before we get to that, I'd just like to ask Harvey to give some background to his life and ministry. So good to see you, Harvey. Thank you for being here. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Eddie. This is really good. Been looking forward to talking with you for a long time. So this is exciting. Thanks for having me. And as you have said, I come from Malawi, grew up in Malawi, and grew up sort of in the church. My dad is a pastor, so I grew up in the church, almost practically. But 20 years ago, almost 21 years ago, my church in Malawi sent me as a youth worker missionary to Switzerland to help somebody set up a school of ministry. And that sort of brought me to Europe, the first time in Europe, and just experiencing Christianity in a different context. I worked around Germany, Switzerland, Austria for 3 years, really enjoyed the work, came to the UK, did a master's in missions in the UK. I finished that, went to the US, did a PhD in missions, and then came back to the UK. So that's really where I'm coming from. In the UK here, I did some work with a Ghanaian denomination that bought what used to be Crowther Hall in Birmingham.
Okay.
Now called Birmingham Christian College.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with them for a while before joining CMS in Oxford, Church Mission Society in Oxford. And from Church Mission Society, I came up to Liverpool, where I have now been for a number of years, and teaching African Christianity and enjoying it. Yeah.
You remind me of one of my favorite characters from the book of Acts. It's Apollos,
Okay.
who was an African who did his theological training in Asia and then was a missionary in Europe. Because you're an African, you've done theological training in the States and you're a missionary in Europe.
That's right. Yeah, Apollos is a good, interesting character, right? He shows up here and there, and sort of the Corinthians sort of divided. Some want to go with Paul, others want to go with Apollos. Yeah, he's a good character. I love him.
Yeah, and I think he's one of the first real examples of a world Christian. And,
yes,
he's a model for the church today, but that's another conversation. What I'd like to do, as I mentioned, is to talk about your book, Multicultural Kingdom, which was published last year. Do you think you could just give us an overview of what the book is about and why and how you came to write it?
Yes. So as I've said, started experiencing European Christianity in Switzerland back in 2001. I came from Malawi, and Malawi back then was, I think even until today, was experiencing a great revival, which meant churches were growing, people were converting to Christianity in large numbers, and it was just a good season for Christians and Christianity in Malawi. Found myself in St. Gallen in Switzerland, and it was the opposite. I could not fathom. It did not make sense to me how Europeans would walk away from Christianity. They are the people who sent the missionaries to Africa, right? I mean, from Switzerland, we do know about Basel Mission, right? That had a huge impact, especially in West Africa, in Ghana. But to find myself in Switzerland and realize that these people don't care about Christianity at all, coming from a context of revival in Malawi, that shocked me. But another thing that I found interesting was that even though the Europeans in Switzerland, Germany, Austria, did not really respond well to Christianity, there were quite a few African congregations in those countries that were doing well, that were thriving. And of course, later on, I discovered many Asian congregations and many other Latin American congregations throughout Europe. Saw the same thing in the US. Now, so I immediately started to notice that the African congregations, Asian congregations, Latin American congregations were doing well. Their expression of Christianity was growing, while that of many white Europeans wasn't looking as promising. And then I started to ask, how come they don't then work together to explore what God is doing in bringing them in contact with each other? And that became the question that stayed with me as I did my master's here in the UK, exploring the question of, how do we evangelize Europeans? Went on for the PhD, same question, how do we evangelize Europeans? But now with a focus on how do the Africans help evangelize Europeans? Now, in the background to that is just the whole issue of now we have something called world Christianity, which has not existed in this form before. That, I mean, we do know for sure that up to around 1950, just 70 years ago, 85% of Christians in the world were white and lived in the West, Europe, North America, maybe Australia, New Zealand. That figure has gone down now to somewhere between 30 and 33%. So around 30% of what Christians are white and living in the West. Now, world Christianity, as much as we celebrate it, we realize that it makes sense when we think and talk about Christians in their own geographical parts of the world. Right. That we can talk about African Christians in Africa, and we talk about Latin American Christians in Latin America. What becomes exciting for me is when we see these Christians from different parts of the world become neighbors in European cities or American cities, right? London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester. We can say the same of Berlin, Munich. We can say the same in Zurich, Helsinki, Atlanta, Minneapolis, all these places. We now see many Christians from around the world come together, become neighbors in the same blocks, in the same societies. The challenge is that when this happens, even though they are in the same localities, these world Christians are not engaging one another. So we are able to talk about African Christianity in Africa, but it's hard to see African Christians in the UK, for example. We can talk about South Korean Christianity in South Korea, but South Korean Christians in the UK, where we are today, are sort of not well recognized. When I worked in Minneapolis, I had friends who ran a church in Minneapolis, and the church sent nurses to Ghana every year around Christmas to go and work in Ghana and help people in Ghana, right? Unknown to these churches leaders was the fact that the church next door to them was from Ghana, right? And they never connected. They sent me nurses to Ghana, but they had a Ghanaian church just next to them, and they never spoke to them at all. So that's where the question of a multicultural kingdom comes up. How do we as Christians from different parts of the world, different cultures, different skin colors, different languages, different expressions of Christianity, right? How do we live together here in the UK or in the West and figure out how to worship together. So the main argument is that, yes, God's kingdom is a multicultural kingdom.
Yeah.
It's meant to be that way. That's what Christ intended it to be. He did not intend it to be a body of one culture. He intended it to be a body of many cultures, many members, many different expressions from different parts of the world.
Yeah.
What's critical is knowing that the kingdom is multicultural. How does then the kingdom function as a multicultural group of people worshiping God together? Right. And that's the question that I try to answer in the book.
Yeah.
Sorry for a long-winded answer.
Well, asking you to explain why you wrote the book and what it says it requires a long answer. But one of the things you say in the book is, just quoting you, for us here in Britain, migrant Christians bring gifts that British churches need to receive. And British churches have gifts that migrant Christians need for the body to be whole. It needs the gifts of all churches to be fully contributed. What do you see as the gifts that migrant Christians bring to the church in the UK? And what does the UK church bring to the migrants?
Yes, so background to that quotation is my use of Ephesians 4. And Ephesians 4:16 becomes very critical to my argument, in that it says Christ is the head of the body, which we all understand, but he has given gifts to the members of the body, and the body is glued together. I think this is the language of the King James version, the version that I grew up on.
Me too.
The body is glued together by that which every joint supplies. So every member, every part of the body has something to give. And of course, in exchange, then every part of the body, every member has something to receive.
Yeah.
And that life in the body is really about this exchange of giving and receiving between the members of the body.
Yeah.
And this exchange is what keeps the body together, is what makes the body the body. Right now, of course, in that sense, then we should understand that when God brings us up to engage with strangers, people who have come from different cultures, from different parts of the world, he has something in our hands that he wants us to give to the strangers, but he has also placed something in the hands of the strangers that he wants them to give to us.
Yeah.
It's this exchange that makes the kingdom work. And so, yes, Latin Americans, Africans, Asians all bring gifts to the table. Europeans bring gifts to the table. And they bring gifts, but they also need to receive from the table. Same for everybody, right? That without this exchange, the body cannot function, cannot be whole. The body needs the exchange to be whole. Now, and I find this to be quite important, especially to my Western friends.
Yeah.
Because where we're coming from, our history suggests that Westerners do the most giving, and I mean, I would actually argue that many Westerners don't know how to receive gifts from other parts of the world. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But
I would agree.
if this is to work, Westerners have to be able to give and receive as well, right? That's how this is supposed to work. Now, Africans bring their gifts to the table, gifts that Westerners need to receive and pay attention to, and Westerners have gifts. Europeans, British people have gifts for the African church. That's what makes the body work. Now, when we think about gifts of the African church in Britain, quite a few things come up. I think the most profound, at least in my understanding of what's happening here, is the gift of community.
Yeah.
That Western Christianity, and this is a generalization, but
yeah,
you can make but Western Christianity is to a great extent shaped by a culture of individualism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We nuclear families, which don't really make sense to many of us from Africa and other parts of the world. The faith, the focus on the individual Christian receiving Christ into his heart and following Christ on his own, that just doesn't really make sense to many of us in Africa. What we bring to the table is this understanding of the faith as a communal journey, that we work together as a community to make it happen, right? And in that community there will be families, right? And so several generations of people processing the faith together as a family in a community, right? Where worship is not tailored for the individual. It's not just bless me or bless my soul. It really becomes bless us, right? What's God doing in this community? How is God blessing this community? How can we be part of what God is doing in this community? And I think that's a significant contribution that comes from the African church, just to cause us to begin to think more communal and not individualistic as Western as we have been for generations. One, two, I think, and this could be probably the gift of the African church toward Christianity, just a new way of understanding. We could talk about the Trinity as a whole, but I want to focus on the Holy Spirit and the work of the Spirit in the community's processing of the faith, right? And that emphasis on the work of the Spirit for most Africans draws them straight to prayer, because it is through prayer that you engage the spirit world, right? And it's through prayer that you engage the Holy Spirit, and only through prayer that you can really serve God. And African Christians, because we come from a culture where the spirit world is at the center of our worldview, and that's not just in Christianity. I do think that Christianity messes that up a little, because the Christianity that comes to Africa in the 1800s does not really know how to engage with the spirit the way the Africans do. But if Africans get this thing well, the spiritual worldview that shapes their culture helps them process Christianity in a different way. And causes them really to be communities of prayer. So in my 20 odd years of serving and working with churches, Europe, North America, I've never seen an African church that doesn't have a night of prayer at least once a month. Right here in the West. And a great deal of those prayers are really based on the belief that in this world, there are spiritual forces that will want to frustrate our progress, right? And so they engage in things like spiritual warfare to just, believing that the only way to make it is to clear out the spiritual world so that we can thrive. I do think that Christianity, above everything else, is a spirit-centered religion. I think that one of most fundamental statements by Paul is when he says, "Live according to the Spirit" in Galatians. live in the Spirit, walk in the Spirit. And African Christians get this one easily because it's in their culture.
Yeah.
And so they can help world Christianity begin to understand the Spirit in a better, in a different way. And they can invite world Christianity to prayer again in a way that's different from what we see around the world, really.
And on the other side of the coin, what do you see Western Christians or British Christians bringing to the table?
Yeah, so let's start again on the issue of the Spirit. I'm reminded of that an adage that's become sort of one of my favorite sayings over the past few years, that if somebody's only tool is a hammer, every problem becomes a nail.
Yeah.
Right. That's the only solution to solving everything is just nail it down. Right. And that's a challenge for especially for African Christians who seem to think that every problem has to be sorted out spiritually.
Yeah.
And so the years, the centuries of European theological thought, European ecclesiological practices makes it possible and even necessary for the Africans to begin to engage, to understand that you don't, if you're going to make this work, if it's going to work well for you, you need to engage both the spirit world and just the human world that we live in. Right. That I mean, science and religion are not necessarily there to be enemies. Right. That I can give you an example. We're in the season of struggling with the pandemic, with COVID.
Yeah.
Right. I talked to my community in Malawi. So on the one hand, they have problems because they have been told that the vaccines are out here to sort of kill off Black people.
Yeah.
Which I've said doesn't make sense. But for them, this whole situation is a spiritual problem. They believe that more prayer, more fasting, more this and more that is going to sort of take this whole problem away. Right. And I'm saying, yes, we can continue to pray and God will continue to perform miracles and heal us, but engage with the sciences, right? Engage with the hospitals and right. And I think that that's one of the gifts that the African church needs to receive, that conversion to Christianity and beginning to walk in the Spirit doesn't mean that you live in a world where sciences don't matter. Right. So there is that. And I think the other thing, and this one is tricky, is that the way African Christianity has come about over the past 200 years, it reflects a lot of African culture.
Yeah.
Right. And it takes on some of the problems in every culture has good things, every culture has some bad things that we need to negotiate. And I think African Christianity in taking on African culture runs the risk of just taking everything from African culture wholesale and baptizing it into Christianity. Right. And one of the things is the way we do leadership and the way we do power in African communities, very much concentrated in a few individuals, and many times no proper accountability and things of that sort, right? And I do think that one of the things that we can learn from our Western friends is just do things with accountability, right?
Yeah.
Do this power thing differently and and be accountable to your board, be accountable, make sure that the finances are run with integrity and things of that sort. I do think that this is important for the African church to get.
Yeah.
I argue that the future, at least as we can see now in 2021, we will be shaped. The future of Christianity will be shaped quite significantly by what's happening in Africa today. And Andrew Wars has said this many times. But that future requires the African church to step up its game and learn how to do some things differently. If we are going to lead in world Christianity, let's learn how to be a bit more accountable, how to live with integrity in our ministries. Yeah.
So taking that thought that we all should bring gifts to the table and should receive from each other. You made another comment that, let me try and read it. In the marketplace and the workforce, racial discrimination is not tolerated. In sport and entertainment, racism is banned. However, it is somewhat accepted as the norm for churches to be segregated, even in multi-ethnic communities. So if that's the case, we're not bringing things to the table, or perhaps we're bringing things to the table, we're just not sitting around the same table. Why do you think that sort of segregation is happening in churches in the UK today? And what can be done about it?
Yeah, a great deal about this is just the fact that the demographics are changing now, right? They've been changing for the past maybe 50, 60, 70 years, but we actually feel it and see it now, right? So we have done things a certain way for generations.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the demographics have changed, right? And that caused us to begin to think, the country is changing.
Yeah.
In 2011, 14% of the population was non-white British. I do expect that this census is going to go up.
Yeah.
From 14%. So the demographics of the country are changing. As Christians, as churches, we need to catch up. We need to begin to think about how do we change what we're doing for it to begin to look like where the nation is going, right? And so and that's a plea to the British churches, right? That can they be a bit more open and a bit more hospitable for people of different skin colors and different accents from around the world. But that's also a plea to the migrant churches, African, Latin American, that God doesn't send us just so that we can reach fellow migrants. God sends us to reach out to the people around us. They could be white British, they could be Polish, they could be from any part of the world, and we need to begin to find ways to actually reach out to our neighbors. And I think that's where we are. We have done things a certain way. We need to change. We need to find new ways to do things that are relevant to the demographic context that we live in today.
Now, one character who occurs throughout the book, and you reference her a number of times, is your mother. She is mentioned a number of times, and I was intrigued by the influence that she has had on your thinking. I just wondered whether you'd like to just expand on how you've related to your mum, you've bounced ideas off her, and how she has helped form your thinking.
Yeah, my mother is a theologian who never really went to school. She's a theologian in that she has worked and served God for decades in a church that my parents started in 1987, and they still lead it now. They are now beginning to think about, let's retire.
Yeah.
But they've led a congregation in the same community, in the same place for 30 years. And that's something. In those 30 years, they have learned a few things that probably I would say that you don't even learn in the seminary.
Yeah.
Right. And one of those things for her was just this, that her coming to the realization that in our community, it is only in our churches back in Malawi where people can come and do different things from different cultural perspectives and still work together as a community. Right. So there will be and so where I grew up in Malawi, it's a place where 3 tribal communities have coexisted for a very long time. Different languages, different musical expressions, different everything, but you live together. And the good thing for us as kids growing up there, you pick up the languages without even knowing that you're learning a new language. Right. So you don't necessarily need an interpreter when something is happening in a different language. And when they meet up in church on any given Sunday, there will be 3 languages spoken. And almost everybody is going to be fluent in those languages. But the amazing thing that is that when things happen in those languages, the cultural nuances of those communities show. Right. So if say they are singing a song in Yao, one of the languages, the drums take a Yao beat. The people dancing, they dance in a Yao manner, right? And so when that is done, somebody preaches in a different language, and the community is following. And after that, they will sing a hymn in another language, and they are following, and they enjoy these. They enjoy these gifts from these other cultures brought to the table, so that the whole community can eat from it. So when I said I'm writing a book on Multicultural Kingdom, first question was, what do you mean Multicultural Kingdom?
Yeah.
Right. All the kingdoms I know are made up of one culture. Right. So and then she took a few days and came back to me and said, that's exactly what God wants us to be. God's kingdom, but many cultures in it. Right. And so in the context of the conversation, I begin to explain to her that, but that's not how we do it here in Europe or North America. That in North America, for sure, more than 92% of congregations are made up of people of one race. In the UK, it may be lower than that, but it's still not too different.
Yeah.
And she got very concerned. She got quiet. She sort of tried to process this. And then in a wise motherly way, she just says, you know what, tell your friends you don't know what you're missing. And I think she's right. We don't know what we are missing when we choose to just stick with one culture and do everything in the same way that we've done it forever.
Certainly my experience, that's, as a Westerner who's been privileged enough to live in an African village for years, I would thoroughly agree.
It gives Christianity a different flavor.
Yeah.
And it allows you to see the stranger not as a threat, but as God's gift to you, because the stranger brings you something that you don't know, that you don't have.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to be hospitable, right? which is a key value in Christianity. There's no faith without hospitality.
Yes.
I should mention that here in the UK, the future of Christianity itself, at least as we see it now, is looking more and more dark in complexion.
Yeah, yeah.
In that, on the one hand, of course, where Christianity is growing, it's mostly among migrant congregations, especially African congregations.
Yeah.
We do know for sure that a majority of people who attend church in London today are Black, African or Afro-Caribbean.
Yeah.
And the future is looking like that. This is where we're going. And the only way we can get to that future together, and the only way we can make this thing work, is if we actually become more intentional about working together across cultures.
Absolutely.
Right? Building these small multicultural communities, multicultural congregations that allow us to speak into this mission field of Britain as united members of the body of Christ, and make it possible for people to see representation of themselves in what we are doing. Right? That I do this all the time. I get invitations to engage with this church or that church.
Yeah.
And first thing I do is go look at their website. Right? And it's, as it usually happens, it's going to be the leadership team is going to be made up of people of one race.
Yeah.
White or Black, and that I don't find that attractive at all.
No.
So the future is multicultural. The future of the faith is multicultural. We don't have a choice. It's not something that we can opt out of. Let's figure out how to make it work. We don't have another option. There's no plan B here.
There is no. I like that. There is no plan B.
Sure.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you, Harvey. Again, I'll put a link to your book. I think it's one of Multicultural Kingdom is one of the most important books on the church in the UK that I've ever read, and would very much encourage others to read it.
Thank you so much.
Just changing tack slightly in closing. We've heard from you as a scholar, as an observer of the nature of the church. Just to get a bit of an idea of the person who lies behind that, a question I've been asking folks. Could you just let us know your favorite book and your favorite piece of music, both Christian and secular?
Sure. Yeah, good question. On the secular front, the book that I love, and the way that I know that this is a book I value, is the book that I've given to my friends the most, is Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell why it resonates, but it just does. It just, I mean, I grew up in the village in Africa, in rural Africa. I did not grow up in town. And so learning from Malcolm Gladwell about how life works, about how talent doesn't cover everything, that you need to work hard, you need to put in your hours to make it. I find that very, very helpful. On the Christian front, at the moment, I'm reading a lot of African Christian thinkers, scholars of the 1950s, 1960s.
Okay.
And the reason I'm doing that is because the struggle of the 50s and 60s of against colonialism, I do think that they need to play themselves out again against whatever forms of colonialism we are struggling with at the moment. And so I'm finding those old African leaders, John Beatty, Quest Dickson, John Pobby, all these guys, I find them very helpful and very relevant. I really do think that African Christianity has to rethink decolonization again.
Yeah.
Music. I grew up on Hillsong.
Okay.
really, in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I got to a place where I thought, no, I mean, yeah, I got to a place where the African in me sort of began to speak a bit louder, and so started paying attention to what's happening on the Christian music scene in the continent.
Yeah.
And that's led me to a place where now I think most of the times, if you hear me listening to Christian music, is going to come from Africa, and very intentionally African Christian music that reflects African cultures.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are quite a few musicians in the continent that are key in African Christian music, African drums, African mbiras, and African this and African that.
Yeah.
I just love that. Secular music, I grew up on reggae. I love the anti-Babylon spirit of reggae.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes reggae a music that connects well with the marginalized. It's music that works for the oppressed.
Yeah.
Really, it's sort of you take liberation theology and put it into music. It becomes reggae, right?
Yes.
And I love it because it helps me think through the decolonization issues that we have to wrestle with now. So favorite musicians will be mostly African reggae artists. I grew up on Lucky Dube. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. And I think that's one of the guys that I listen to quite a lot. But there are many other Malawian reggae artists and others that you'll find on my iPod.
Well,
that's me.
Yeah,
that's where I'm coming from.
Having lived in Ivory Coast, my favorite African reggae artist is Alpha Blondy.
Alpha Blondy.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was good.
I think he's great. Really, really good.
Sure. So that's the African in me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for spending time. It really is encouraging, and thank you for the gracious way that you engage with and challenge people like me. We need it, and I'm very, very grateful that you're there.
Thank you.
Spurring us on.
Thank you so much. It's good. God bless.